Hello and welcome to the Self Storage Made Simple podcast. I am your host, Thaddeus Campbell. This week, get to have joined me one of the very first people that I connected with in the self-storage industry. I had a deal in Kent, Ohio that I was shopping around to various storage owners and developers around the country. This is going back to August of 2021, and connected with Michael Pagoda, who is with Pagoda Co., one of the top owners in self-storage, but specifically in that Michigan and Ohio region. And what an amazing guy right from the beginning, and sharing the Kent, Ohio deal. Took the time to take me through the deal because I had no idea what I was shopping whatsoever, and been very fortunate that Michael and I have stayed connected over the last few years, and was kind enough to join me to come on. Michael Pagoda, Vice President of Acquisitions for Pagoda Co. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Thaddeus. I really appreciate it. And I'm just going to echo those sentiments that, you and I probably every year, a couple times a year, see each other at trade shows. And you are one of my favorite people to speak to. And speaking candidly, your LinkedIn posts, besides learning and being motivated by your fitness journey, which is great to see, I think you provide a really candid and honest view about the industry, both the incredible parts and how great the people are, and also how hard it is. And I think you provide a great balance. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that feedback, and it means so much. One of the reasons I put myself out there so much is hopefully for exactly what you said, so that people can get the real, right? It's not trying to sugarcoat. We love what we do, and we're in this amazing industry, but that doesn't mean that it's a simple path, or that there aren't people that are losing in the industry, people that are hurting because their decisions haven't worked out the way they want to. So appreciate you noticing that. It means a lot to me. I want to start like I always do. I always ask people, because you kind of mentioned this unique industry that we're in, and I'm a little older than you, obviously, a little more gray hair, but I've been in a few other industries and have some comparison. It's really unlike anything I've ever been exposed to, and I love to understand how people. Obviously, your father has been in this industry for a long time. I'd love to understand the journey of the Pagodas into self storage and how that happened, and how Michael ended up joining the team.
Sure, absolutely. And I'll start with the Pagoda family, and then I'll go into a little bit of my journey. So my father, Maurice, started the business in 1987, and he's from New York. He's from Brooklyn, New York, and he was looking for his niche. And no one in the state of Michigan was doing self-storage, and he started off as a self-storage broker. That was a very different time where storage facilities were going back to the bank. And I believe in 1989, the bank called him and said, "Do you do management?" And he said, "Sure." And he started managing facilities. He purchased those facilities. And I'll fast forward a little bit. And today, we own and operate, we own and third-party manage roughly 70 facilities throughout Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky.
You've been very deliberate about that. It's something that you guys are in the top 60 of owners in the country in self-storage, right? And so I'm very interested, because as I look through the list, and I've referenced that often and know that list well because of what my job previously was, not so much anymore, but my old job was to go find developers and owners to shop deals to. You guys are of those really large owners, the most geographically specific, I think, that I've run across. Why the decision just to really stay? You've kind of branched out into Indiana and Kentucky, but not a huge presence in either of those two states, really central to Michigan and Ohio. That obviously had to be deliberate. That's not something that happens by mistake.
Absolutely. And I think so much of it, so throughout our history, there's been a thesis and almost a guiding light that we will not own or third party manage facilities outside of a 4-hour radius of our home office. And it really goes into the current acquisition strategy that we've just found from a management perspective. we've got incredible DMs who kind of, besides the great property managers who are there, we found that the more economies of scale that we have in a location, the easier it is for myself to go out there, our regional managers to go out there. We've just found that it makes us better, and it makes us better operators to be able to kind of touch the properties. And I'll tell you, we were in Indiana and Kentucky last week visiting about 6 of our stores. It's great being in the office. It's great being behind a spreadsheet. There's nothing like seeing the properties. And over the last few years, we've slightly expanded outside of that 4-hour radius. But my goal on the acquisition side is to fill in the pieces, to make it as easier on our management team, who are really, they're the ones running the properties and who live and breathe it. So it's been deliberate, and so far so good.
I'm going to go down a road here that I didn't really plan to go down with you. I was going to come at it from a different angle, but we're seeing something in the space that, for us at Safe Storage USA, when I have conversations with my partners, Russell and David, we're having a hard time wrapping our head around some of the purchases that are happening on a broad scale. And there's still a lot of transaction. It's certainly not what it was during COVID, but, and interest rates have slowed it down a little, but there's still a lot of transactions. Things are being bought at negative leverage almost exclusively. Like, find me a deal that somebody can buy with where bank interest rates are lower than the cap rate they're buying it. It almost doesn't happen. People are buying it still at 5.5, 6 caps, when bank notes until very recently, like even on an existing cash flowing property, you're 7, 7.5.
Yep. So
you're losing money early on, which, okay, if there's a clear path to improve the management, maybe add some space or whatever, we can stomach that. But we're not even finding that, where like just getting the management better and getting the rates better gives a clear path to a profitable purchase. So I a long-winded introduction by way of saying, how are you avoiding that pressure as a company to compete with that and try and, because we all want to grow, right? To a certain extent, you stay alive by growing. In the last couple of years, it's been hard to grow if you aren't willing to take some serious financial risks.
Well, I think our companies are very similar, and I want to give you and your team a lot of credit as well, because it from when we speak, and I listened to your just reflections on SSA podcast, and I thought it was so accurate to what we're seeing. And so I think the biggest differentiator between our two companies is that we're long-term holders. Mm-hmm. And just like our conversation about filling in those pieces geographically, we do have those benefits of the economies of scale, where you say, hey, we've got 3 other properties in this market. We see that the broker is underwriting $65,000 in payroll. Maybe we can share employees or do a hub and spoke model and get that number down to 40,000.
Right.
So it's the short answer is it's challenging. There's no doubt about it. The longer answer is we are very judicious in what we do. We've purchased 2 properties this year. We've got 3 under contract, and it sounds like a lot. I mean, that is a great growth trajectory, but you and I both know that if you look at 200 properties and buy 1, you're very happy. That's a great year. So the long story short is that we are very, my father Maurice always says time is on our side. And we have the benefit of we have bought things that are negative leverage. And whether it's an expansion component or an economies of scale component, we can stomach that for a year or 2,
right,
believing in the 37-year track record and the market. Yeah. But I'm not going to say it's not challenging.
Yeah, I laugh as I was going through recently and looking. You're talking about Prime and Andover and Merritt Hill and City Line and these companies that are literally trying to deploy billions of dollars. And that's who you're committed. We didn't steal. Well, we did steal when we bought it, but we sold a project in Sturtevant, Wisconsin recently, which is like a suburb of Madison, which is already a tertiary market. So we're like a suburb of a tertiary market, and Merritt Hill bought it from us. And for those of you who don't know, Merritt Hill is Wall Street money. I think Blackstone or BlackRock, one of the major equity groups is their backing, and she's brilliant, by the way, a really brilliant operator, somebody who's been able to grow that company incredibly. But they bought it at a price where like we couldn't compete on the other side of that. Like if we were competing with them to buy it, we wouldn't be able to get to that price. And it's a challenge. Like it's hard not to get discouraged when you're fighting in that market. And I think you said something which was, it goes back to a podcast I did with Mitch Feldman, a developer out of Miami, where don't get into real estate because you think you're going to get rich fast, right? Like
No,
it's a
no.
get rich slow deal. And I love what your father said. It doesn't surprise me that it would come out of his mouth that time's on your side. Stay the course and stick to what it is that got you there.
And going back to your original question about the journey, I mean, when you're talking about the primes, the Merritt Hills, the extra spaces, the publics, I mean, these are incredible companies with a different bucket and a different cost of capital that a
100%.
lot of people have. And I think I've got a decade plus of real estate experience wearing different hats. I lived in New York City for close to 7 years. And what I've loved so much about this industry, besides the people in it, the owners will pick up the phone. You know, when I was working in retail acquisitions and we were doing retail, just a quick aside, in New York, Miami, Las Vegas,
Yeah.
I would cold call these guys. They would say, "Who the heck are you?"
Yeah.
And
Maybe
so,
not heck.
exactly, and they they really, I mean, I'm constantly shocked and impressed that you can build relationships in the industry. And I think I'll maybe the big companies, we consider ourselves big but small.
Yeah.
They it is a different, you are competing in a different world, but I do believe that especially in storage, you can differentiate yourself by really building that human connection. And we have, through a lot of cold calls, built relationships where we've purchased properties, and it's not easy, but if it was easy, everyone would do it.
It sounds so, it's such a repeated phrase, but it's absolutely true. It's not supposed to be easy. My background before, maybe you don't, but my background before getting into self storage was being a martial artist, and the one thing I learned from my journey, I ended up with a second degree black belt and was a professional fighter, and the harder the stuff that I did, the more worthwhile it was to do. Right? It's not the stuff that came easy to me did not bring the joy or the satisfaction that the challenging things did, which is you know what I love about storage is that, yeah, it's hard, but man, you're surrounded, like you said, by just a different group of people. It's just different, and I don't know how else to explain it. I guess here's what I'm going to ask you, and I wonder if this has ever come up with your conversations with your dad, whose name, by the way, came up for me. Oddly enough, I was sitting with Mike Burnham at SSA in National Harbor back in March,
Yep.
and I was talking about the fact at the time we were looking to get into, and we still are actually, we believe that there's a market up in Michigan and in the Great Lakes region for boat and RV storage.
Sure.
And we're still looking there. It hasn't been easy, but we're still looking. And he brought up your father's name as someone I need to call and go, hey, you need to go call Maurice Pagoda. And I'm like, here's Mike Burnham, right? You guys technically are competitors. You guys do third party management. They had just started to launch their third party management program. You guys are competing it for a lot of the same types of deals. No problem saying, hey, go talk to this guy. He's going to be a real help to you. And like, what an amazing thing to be in an industry where that happens. So I get my question again. I got a long winded question, but does your father ever talk about that? Like, or do you have some insight into, I'm always amazed by why is it that storage is this way? Why is it so different than any other industry I've ever seen?
Well, I think your comment in the SSA podcast, I mean, we have great respect for the Burnhams. I think everyone in the industry does. They are a Class A people, Class A organization. And your very brief anecdote about the Public Storage takeover
Yeah.
and them, I mean, I speak to my father every day, and he's very actively involved. I'm very lucky to have a mentor like him in the industry. And I think what you said in that last podcast, which I'll repeat, is is so true that storage, from my knowledge and from kind of living this growing up, used to be the ugly duckling of real estate asset classes. And we joke now where in 2021 we would get loans at 3.5%,
Yeah.
4 years interest only. And my father would say, he would talk about his previous experience of almost begging banks to give him a loan and trying to convince them that, hey, just because storage is month to month leases, he actually views that as an advantage
Right.
versus the banks being like, well, they could all move out in one day.
Yeah.
And that, of course, that's true. But I think the industry used to be so hard, and it still is hard, just in different, in probably more evolved ways.
Yeah.
But you needed to rely on people. And I think the other thing is storage is it is such a regional business. You are looking at your 3 mile, your 5 mile, your 10 mile radius. And, we could own properties in Detroit and have a competitor. We own properties as well in Grand Rapids, but have a competitor in Grand Rapids. In some ways, it's a different world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's all of those things that have made the industry just uniquely tight knit and willing to help.
Yeah, I love that. And as I said, I mean, I got into this in August of 2021. I've had a couple interactions with people where it was like, yeah, maybe I'm not going to call you a whole
It's not
lot
always
again.
perfect.
But literally, I mean, how many people are really developing that there aren't, we figure there's going to be 1,000 new stores open up this year. Most people are doing multiple developments, that it's not a lot of one-off. There's some one-offs, but what are there? Maybe 300 guys that are really developing new stores in any type of real way. And I'm 150 deep into relationships with those people, and maybe one or two that were like, you know what, I don't have time to return your phone call. Those odds are so overwhelming to me. I worked in martial arts, which is like supposed to be, and then talk about a tough industry, an industry where not a lot of people make it.
Sure.
And you really needed to talk to your neighbor. My buddy Jim Garzillo, who I to this day I love to death. We bought our schools the same day. We would talk every single night for a half hour. I still owe it to him that I made it because we were losing money. Both of us lost money for a year and a half. But we would share stories every day about what was working, what wasn't working, what do we have to change. But that was a rarity in that industry. Like the fact that I had him was not the norm. And he was in the same organization I was. We were in the same franchise. God forbid I called the guy down the street that was the competitor and tried to ask him to share some information. Store's the exact opposite. And I asked this question going back to Mike Burnham, and I'm like, he was on the podcast, and I'm like, Mike, why do you give rate information to your competitors? Why will you tell them if the market's going to work or not? That seems like he's like, look, Dad, if I don't tell them, they're going to open the store anyway, and they might ruin my market.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd much rather have the conversation with them. And even if I tell them, hey, the rates here don't really justify it, and they're going to open anyway, well, I want to go through and really share, hey, these are the unit types that are at least working in the market. These are already not working. Don't build a bunch more 5x5s. It's not going to serve you. And I can speak on firsthand experience with this. We were building in my previous partners, we were building a project in San Antonio, and Storage Mart took our drawings, our plans, and were willing to go. And now we were, in hindsight, too dumb at the time to realize what an opportunity that was.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
we didn't know, hey,
sure.
this is Storage Mart. But they were willing to go and give us exactly what we should build in that market based on the stores that they already owned. And it's like, man, what an amazing thing. Because while when you hear it, it sounds so intelligent, people still don't do it. It's not the norm.
It's not, and I really do believe that storage is an asset class of really rising tides.
Yeah.
And we do third party management. I guess I'll plug our flag is National Storage, not NSA. But
Not National Storage affiliates, just
no,
National
and
Storage.
exactly, and I love what you said. Again, relaying back to the previous podcast about lease up timelines and cost of capital. And I would say once or twice a week, I have conversations with a potential developer and trying to be as honest, as candid as possible, where I'll say, this is not 2021 anymore. This is not a 9-month lease up. We're which has, in some ways overall been a great thing, but in some ways we've missed out on opportunities. We are conservative. We are going to underwrite a 42, 48-month lease up. And some people want to hear it and a lot of people don't. But I think you can sleep easy at night just being honest and having those conversations with people in the industry.
I owe you a thank you, and I've been doing this for the last couple of weeks, and a couple guys I saw at the SSA show who stand out that I literally just want to say thank you, because when I first talked to you about that deal in Ohio, we were and in our defense, we bought our first piece of land in 2019 and broke ground for the first time in 2021, right? So we didn't know what we didn't know at the time. Unfortunately, I didn't hear it from enough people to be able to convince my partners at the time to listen better, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
But we were underwriting. We were underwriting at 36 months for lease up, but we were underwriting at 5.5 cap exit if we chose to sell. And we were underwriting at 5.5, 6% construction debt. We were underwriting at 75% LTC on loans. These things that had become normal during COVID, but were like not even remotely normal for a company like you guys, where you've been in it since 87. And remember that 75% LTC on like you, God forbid, you're lucky if you could get 50% or 60% LTC on a loan, right? Like you go to the bank and if you could get them to even agree to give you anything, it was a benefit. So I guess my greater point is that it's easy to fall into those traps. And I just want to thank you, because you were one of those people right from the beginning who was like, hey man, listen, I get it. And you weren't demeaning in any way, shape, or form, but really upfront about, hey, you might want to look at how you're underwriting that here, here, and here, because that's not the norm. It might continue, but there's every chance that it changes. And of course, when Jerome Powell stepped to the podium in April of 2022, man, it didn't take very long for those things that we were underwriting to be pipe dreams, quite frankly.
Yeah, and in your defense, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
And in your defense, we look at some of the deals. Thankfully, we bought well, but the deals that we bought in 2020, 2021, we probably underwrote those at a 6% sellout cap, and I bet 2 years later we would have underwrote those at a 7 or 7.5. And I think what we talk about constantly and what I think about all the time being in this seat is how not to be a prisoner of the moment. And it is so, you look at opportunities that, OMs that would show in 2021, 20% year over year revenue growth. And then you look today and it's hard. I mean, our portfolio thankfully has done well, not as well as 2021.
Yeah.
But it's really trying to find that balance of 2021 won't last forever. Today won't last forever. And I believe it becomes kind of more of an art than a science, where you say, what is the right number? What is the right rate? It's challenging.
This is a question we ask ourselves almost every week. Like, what are we missing? Because you've got the one side of it, like, hey, we're crazy, we're riding that wave. You got the other side of it, which is, hey, I'm going to be super, super conservative, and I'm going to look at everything in the absolute worst case scenario. Obviously, one gets you in trouble because you make a bunch of expenditures and buy a bunch of properties that just don't live up to that underwriting that you did. The other side of it is you don't buy anything in an industry that's got a 40 plus year track record of showing incredible returns. And so this is a question we ask ourselves. Hey, are we missing a piece here where, like, we're being too conservative? Is there a way to look at these where it's like, man, and fortunately we're three pretty bright guys and have kind of figured out lately what we need to do to have a tactic to kind of attack that. But it's hard. It's hard to sit on your hands, and it's hard not to get overexcited and make that purchase where you're, as you said, not sleeping well at night.
And no matter what you do, no matter every deal, and I don't know if you feel this way, every deal is hard. And I'll give you an example, which I think maybe for the listeners, it's just a little bit of an inside baseball that we're in contract. We're set to close in about a month in South Bend, Indiana. And we went hard on our deposit. Everything, it's been, the sellers are awesome people. Everything's just going really well. And we got our appraisal back a couple days ago. And I get a call from our debt broker saying the appraisal came back at a 9.5 cap.
Oh,
And I was kind of in shock.
yeah,
And
right.
what I did, I spent the afternoon sending articles and market reports. And every deal there's a hiccup, and every deal, sometimes the deal you're confident is going to be a home run
Yeah,
ends up being a single or a double. And my point in saying that is that there's always, every deal feels scary, and there's always a little bit of a leap of faith involved.
isn't that the
It's
absolute
the game
truth?
we're in.
There is no such thing as a clean deal. It just there's always got to be something. You almost hope, and this is kind of sick. It kind of points to the mindset we have to do what we do. You almost hope that problem happens early. Like, there's a major problem early. You're like, get this thing out of the way. I've had deals where the problem was closing day, and that's like, that's even worse, right? It becomes even more of a, like, you're waiting for that check to clear, and it doesn't, and you're like, oh. So your point is very well taken. And I was talking about this actually last week to a group of real estate. I got invited to speak to a bunch of real estate agents, and man, the hardest lesson for me is like, and you talked about it, right? It's in a different way, but for me, I always describe it as stay off the roller coaster.
Hmm.
Don't ride the ups and downs. Stay on the platform, right? Watch the roller coaster, see the data, see what's going on, but stay on the platform and keep your emotions stable. Know that the up's going to come, but the down's going to come too. And if you're on the roller coaster, it can crush you. It can be so hard to operate intelligently if you're riding it, as opposed to if you stand back and you watch it. And as you said, and you just know, hey, listen, we know something's going to happen. I love what you said. What did you do? Well, you went and got data, right? Like,
Hmm.
hey, what can I do here? Well, I'm not going to call and fight with the appraiser. That's not going to serve any purpose. I'm not going to call him a jerk and what are you thinking? And it's not going to do anything. I'm going to go get data. Here's some articles. Maybe I contact a couple brokers that have done sales in Indiana and say, hey, these. When's the last time we saw a self storage facility traded at a 9.5 cap? First of all, I'm like, I start getting excited. Like, really? We might get a self storage facility? I want to know what sale he found that sold at a 9.5 cap that he
Sure.
was using as a reference. Call that owner. Well, listen, I always try and keep this to a half hour.
Sure.
I try and honor your time, but also the people listening's time. We could go on forever. I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning, which is thank you so much for the way you welcomed me into this industry. Your kindness and your kind words during the course of the podcast are I'm very grateful and humbled that you would say that about me as someone who is so new in this industry or relative to a lot of you. I'll say this. the reason that I think I am able to speak a little bit intelligently in this industry is just because of the overwhelming knowledge that people have been willing to share with me. So appreciate you as one of those people that's been a go-to for me when I need to know something. National Storage, the Pagoda Co's, you guys will see down on the screen. Mike's LinkedIn is there. You guys want to get a hold of him. I know he's always willing to talk, especially if you're looking to sell something in Michigan or Ohio or Indiana, Kentucky.
Sure.
You're always looking. If you're looking for third-party management, if you can't tell by listening to him for a half hour what kind of people their company is made up of, I don't know what to tell you, but definitely reach out to him if that's something you guys are looking for. Michael, look forward to the continued relationship, and thanks again so much for joining me.
Thaddeus, thanks so much for having me and adding to how we got connected. If you're building in Michigan, if you want someone to be a resource and be unbiased, whether you sell to us, whether you use us as your third party management, we're here. We're happy to be a resource, and you've been a great friend in the industry, and I'm looking forward to continuing that. So thank you for having me on.
Appreciate it so much, man. That's all for this week's episode of the Self Storage Made Simple podcast. I want to thank, as always, my friends at PropRise for supporting and being the sponsor to the podcast. If you have not reached out to those guys and haven't seen their platform, I strongly suggest www.proprise.io. You'll see the link on the bottom of the screen. They are helping you outpace the acquisition deals in the self-storage market with their platform. On top of that, a bunch of great guys. So thank you to Jean-Michael Da and the team at PropRise. Michael Pagoda, again, thank you so much for coming and joining us. So we'll see you guys next week.